Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras to Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. Our guest is a New Mexico State University social worker who is involved in helping establish the Aggie Cupboard, a food pantry for NMSU students who may be facing hunger. Please welcome Lori Haussamen. Lori, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Now, could you start off by telling us, how did Aggie Cupboard begin?
Well, that was kind of a long story. My day-to-day job is to be a social worker connecting students to resources. So I'm part of the counseling center and part of the campus health center. So when the job first started, I was the first person in it. It was a new position. And my role was just to help get students connected to whatever resources they might be lacking so that they could be more academically successful. And so over the course of a few years, you start to notice patterns. And so one of the things that the students started coming in for a lot was just food. Over and over and over again, lack of food, not enough, having to choose between buying food and paying other bills or going without necessities, and even students who are homeless. And so I started looking just into things and looking at, what is there anything we can do about this, and came to find out that there are some universities with food banks or food pantries on campus. So for example, Michigan State University has actually had a food pantry for 20 years now. Now they're the oldest one that we know of. But since the downturn of the economy, we've seen just more and more pop up nationwide. And so I started looking into that, started looking at how other universities and colleges were structuring their food pantries, and thought, well, why can't we do that here?
Now, many people think or remember their college days as being obviously a time where they didn't have a lot of money and they were, definitely struggling financially, but this is kind of a different kind of hunger. This is some serious poverty that students are dealing with just coming into college.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny because it's kind of a paradigm shift. You have kind of the joke about the poor college student, and people, kind of reflect on that, eating ramen noodles, things like that. But also, a lot of people think of college days as a time of real prosperity, college years being the best years of their life, and kind of thinking back on the good old days. And in recent years, recent being maybe the last 10, 20, I think things have really shifted. More and more students having to work while they're in college, take out loans, that sort of thing, and still not having enough. And then you're absolutely right, you look at just the poverty levels. New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the nation, and so it's not hard to see how that might translate into, well, when you go to college, you don't have any more money. In fact, for a lot of students, they have less, so particularly here in New Mexico.
Now, how is it that, students are able to really get access to the cupboard?
Well, hopefully very easily. My goal was always to try and make it as easy to access as possible, just because there can be so much shame associated with asking for help and coming in for help. And so we wanted to make sure first and foremost that, just like when you come to the counseling center, the services would be confidential. And so we wanted to make sure we respected students' privacy. But really, the short answer is they come in during our hours, they show their NMSU ID, and we give them a bag of food.
Now, you mentioned, shame. I mean, it has to be very difficult for somebody to, go in there and, they may not want to be seen, but I mean, they're facing real hunger. So I mean, have you came across people what are some of the stories that you're hearing from the students that are coming through?
Well, it's a mix, just in terms of the shame piece. Some people have no problem asking for help. They come in, they know the resources there, they're very grateful, and that's not so much an issue. And then other students, you see a more obvious sense of just hesitation, is what I would call it. And we see that in terms of, sometimes we'll get media requests to do stories, usually written stories about the Aggie Cupboard, or sometimes radio or otherwise. And so we always ask our students or staff when they come in, would you be comfortable being interviewed? And some people say, sure, no problem, and other people, no, that's not something I want anybody knowing about. So it's an interesting dynamic.
How long of a process was it really to get it up and running?
2 years. 2 long years. Just a lot of kind of steps to get through, making sure things were done in a university-approved fashion, and also just taking care of things that you probably wouldn't think about, like liability issues, even just things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with food, but the university environment is a pretty complex one, and so it took some time.
Now, where exactly is it located now?
Now we are in Garcia Annex, so we got to move on campus this year, and so we're in, not so much right in the counseling center, but we're able to operate out of the Career Exploration Center, which is part of the counseling center. So in the fall semester, we had hours on Wednesday and Thursday, and so students would just come in. We have a little, private room. They come in, show their ID, we ask them a few questions, and give them their food.
Is there a time of the year where you're maybe needing more food, or at the end of the semester, are you seeing more students when maybe they're running out of money and getting close to finals and it's a stressful time?
Yeah, we tend to see kind of ebbs and flows along with the semester, and I only have a year's worth of data because we got started in October 2012, but from what we've seen so far, it would seem probably right around midterms is when things seem to pick up. So there's some students and staff who come in, right away from the beginning of the semester, but I think there are probably a number of things that contribute to it, but maybe financial aid runs out, or maybe students can't work as many hours when they have to study for midterms or finals. Holidays, we see an increased demand. So,
how is a student affected by facing, food scarcity issues?
Well, probably a lot of ways. In terms of just pure academic success, it's hard to study, it's hard to concentrate if you're hungry, especially if you're chronically hungry. And so I would suspect that has a direct impact on a student's ability to be successful here. But hunger, it's a basic human need, and so it affects so many things. It can affect, obviously, your physical health, your mental well-being, your ability to be academically successful. There's just so many things. And we do every semester, at the end of the semester, we do a client satisfaction survey, and so we ask the people who come in, give us some feedback on how we're doing at the Aggie Cupboard, what would you recommend we do different, what brings you in. And so we have students, some students come in saying, my income isn't enough to cover my expenses. Other students saying, I have a family who's dependent on me. It's not just me I'm providing for, I have a family too. Some students saying, I've lost weight since coming to college, not because I was trying to, but because I didn't have enough food, or I'm skipping meals to get by, things like that. So we see just lots of the things that contribute.
Now, many people think of food pantries or cupboards around the holidays. How important is that holiday giving season to you throughout the year?
So far, it's been really important. The Aggie Cupboard is run on food donations that people bring in, and then we were also able to set up a fund through the NMSU Foundation so that if someone wanted to donate financially, they could. And so that way, if we're running low on certain food items, I can just go out and buy them. And so in terms of the holidays, you're right, we always, at least always, 2 years now, both years have seen a real increase in giving around the holidays, particularly right before Thanksgiving. And last year that proved to be really important for us because we're still in our first year. And so the food that came in around Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2012 carried us through the spring semester. So it was a pretty big deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there like a scarcity issue or any issues with not having enough food at the end of the semester?
I have worried about that because the last thing I want to do is have a program that people can't rely on or have to, God forbid, turn people away. We have had times when we've run really low, but thankfully have never run out. And so one of the really amazing things about this, though, has been that if we do start to run low on food, I can send out an announcement. I could put, kind of pass the word. So much of Aggie Cupboard has gone out through word of mouth, and people, the community has stepped up. So it's been pretty great.
Let's talk about the community a little bit.
Okay.
What are some of the organizations that have been able to work with you to help get the word out, or maybe bring in some donations?
Oh, sure. There's been quite a few, actually. I couldn't even tell you all of them right now because it's a pretty long list. But we had, last year when we got started, one of the big issues was that we couldn't be on campus right away. And so we had to try and find somewhere else we could get started. So there's a student organization called Christian Challenge who's been around NMSU for forever and ever and ever. They were formerly known as the BSU. And so they own a building on University Avenue, literally as close to campus as you can get without actually being on campus. And so they agreed to host us last year. And they were just very good to us. So they let us use their space for distribution. We had space there to store food. So they helped us out a great deal last year. And even this year as we moved on campus, even though they're not volunteering necessarily with distribution of food because we have a small space now and we don't need that many on the actual distribution days, they've continued to do food drives and bring in food for us. So there's Christian Challenge. Sodexo, which is campus dining, they did a Helping Hands campaign for us last year that brought in $438, and every semester they have a pancake finals dinner. And so to get into that, students can pay or they can bring in, a food item. And so for the last 3 semesters, Sodexo has sent that food right on over to us. So they've been a huge help as well. We've had the Newman Center, which is the Catholic Student Ministry, and they do Lunch Bunch for a Cause. They have their own food program. So they do Lunch Bunch, which is lunch Monday through Friday, and they serve lunch for $1 for students. And so every semester they have a couple lunch bunches that they call Lunch Bunch for a Cause, and whatever money they bring in for that, they choose a charitable donation. So one time last year, and then also in the fall semester, they used their Lunch Bunch for a Cause for us. And so that brings in money too that we can use to buy food.
What are some of the students that are working with you right now throughout the year? What are their majors and what are they really focusing on?
Well, it's been different from last year to this year. I supervise 2 to 3 social work interns every year, and so along with their other responsibilities, seeing clients and doing outreach and working for the crisis line, now their duties involve working for the Aggie Cupboard as well. So this year I have 3 social work interns and 1 graduate assistant who's also a social work major. And then we've just had, last year we had volunteers just come in left and right from various majors. This year, same thing. We get student groups also left and right, whether it's housing or the Greeks, or this year we had the Aggie men's basketball team who wanted to help out. Just all over campus, different groups wanting to do some form of community service, and so it's a pretty wide range.
So you mentioned earlier, the data is out there on how poor of a state New Mexico is and where it's ranking in child hunger, for example. What is some of the data that you've come across and found out recently, or is there any recent trends? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Well, it seems to be just based on hunger getting worse. So if you're talking about just poverty, if you're looking at poverty versus food insecurity, they're related, but they're different. So New Mexico has, historically, we're pretty much always near the top in terms of the state with the highest poverty level. So in terms of the U.S. Census, don't quote me exactly here, but the nationwide poverty level is usually somewhere around 12%, and New Mexico's is usually somewhere around 18 or 19%, so significantly higher. But then if you break it down even more, if you look at our county, Doña Ana County, our poverty rate is about 25%, which is pretty unbelievable if you think about it. That's 1 in 4 people walking around in our county who live under the poverty line. And that number even is probably underreported because the census doesn't take into account, for example, someone who's undocumented. And so you think about, how that kind of starts to add up, and there are a lot of people in our county living in poverty, not to mention the state.
Trying to balance the budget, and there's many different cuts at the federal level, local level. What are some of those cuts that are really affecting food scarcity in this region?
Well, The federal government recently cut funding to SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or more commonly known as food stamps. And so I think we're just starting to see the ripple effects from that, because that just happened in the last few months. And so there's been, with a cut to a program like SNAP, if a household has really relied on their food stamp benefits and that gets cut, you're going to see those households coming in and relying more on emergency food assistance like food pantries. And so, I think what will happen from that remains to be seen, but I can't imagine that we would see anything but those numbers going up in terms of people going to food pantries, especially when you look at the data here. There's a group called Feeding America, which is really like they're the hunger experts in the US, and they're a collaboration of food banks across the country. And so they did a study called Map the Meal Gap. The first one was in 2010, and they just released one in 2013. And so they look at overall rates of hunger or food insecurity, and then they looked at statewide, different states, how they compare. And so 3 years ago, New Mexico was ranked 11th in terms of child hunger, so 18 and under child hunger. And in 3 years, we went from 11th to 1st in child hunger, which translates into, so that's 30.6% of our kids in New Mexico, and that's 156,930, and that's just children. So, that's a pretty significant gap in just 3 years. And then you look at overall, New Mexico is ranked second in the nation for hunger. So that's overall when you incorporate adults. That's 20.1% of our population who don't always know where they're going to find their next meal. So again, 1 in 5 people in our state experiencing some level of food insecurity. Pretty darn high.
What were some of the experts saying that really contributed to that big of a jump?
I don't know. I don't know what the experts say. In terms of poverty and food insecurity, the talk is normally that it's complicated. People tend to want really simple answers when it comes to things like poverty or food insecurity, but the reality is the causes are complicated, which means the solutions are probably going to be also complex. But you look at, we had a pretty significant economic downturn in the last, 5 years, that's continued to get worse, and New Mexico doesn't seem to have bounced back quite as well as some other states. We have, less in terms of the private sector, and so when government funding for public benefits gets cut, in some ways New Mexico seems to have a more difficult time bouncing back. Then you also think about, we live in a rural area, so it can be harder, especially if you don't have transportation or reliable transportation, to get access to the things that you need. We have things like colonias in our county, which are, we're not a third world country, but if you look at colonias in New Mexico, you're looking at communities that live without infrastructure on a day-to-day basis. So there's some third world type conditions, even in our county. And that's just what I can think of off the top of my head, but there are a lot of things that contribute to food insecurity and poverty as well.
Now, you mentioned that when these things happen, cuts happen, New Mexico not bouncing back from the recession as fast as other states, a lot of pressure is on food pantries. What are some of those pressures that you're seeing with food pantries, on what type of tough decisions do they have to make?
Well, I'm new to the food pantry business. I'm a social worker, and so all this that I've learned about running a food pantry has come in the last year. When we got started, I went around to different food pantries just to pick their brains, because these people, churches and other food pantries, they've been doing this for a while, and I was new to the game, so I really wanted to pick their brains. But it's, it seems to be across the board, just the more and more numbers of people coming in and just needing to find more ways and more creative ways to make sure that food and funding keeps coming in. And so whether it's applying for grants, whether it's doing participating in different community programs, ongoing food drives, churches relying on their parishioners for assistance, there's just the need for more and more help because more and more clients are coming in.
As far as running a food pantry, what are some of the challenges in that you really found as you put that together and started a couple years ago?
It's a tricky balance. It's for one, the Aggie Cupboard is a piece of my job, not the whole job. And really, you probably could dedicate one person, an entire person, just to working on the food pantry. So in that regard, I'm really thankful I have interns and volunteers and a grad assistant. But in terms of challenges, there's always a constant need to make sure food is coming in. So in terms of just PR and marketing, trying to keep the Aggie Cupboard constantly out there so that it's on people's radar. So making sure food comes in. If there are items, for example, protein, that's something that goes through the cupboard: peanut butter, canned chicken, canned tuna, beans. Anything high protein goes out quickly, and so just constantly having to make sure that we have protein coming in, or some of the staples. Making time to go shopping to get the food. Keeping track of data and the numbers, so keeping track of the number of people who come in, and looking at what kind of food we're going through quickest. And also there's a piece of it that's in terms of supply and demand and marketing that has felt very tricky to me as well. So what I would like to be able to do is for the Aggie Cupboard, for us to be constantly doing marketing about the Aggie Cupboard so that the people who need it the most can come in and get it. But I'm also having to balance that with the food we have coming in. So we never really tell people not to come in. We always tell people to come in, but I don't want to market the Aggie Cupboard quicker than donations are coming in. So it feels like there's been a really tricky balance in that regard.
So tell us a little bit about donations and how people, what they can do to donate, and make sure that it is the end of the holiday season, that just passed us up, and a new semester is beginning. So students want to obviously still need the services, and there may happen to come a time where the cupboard could run low. So how can people give?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking that, first of all. People can always bring in food. So it's non-perishable food. It can't be anything that needs refrigerating because we don't have a way to refrigerate anything. So it's all non-perishable food items. People can always drop that off at the counseling center, which is in Garcia Annex. And we also have made arrangements so that if people can't come on campus, for example, we've had community members who wanted to donate too. And so, for example, if they can't come on campus because they don't have a parking permit, we can make arrangements to do a pickup. So people can always donate food that way. We do have an account through the NMSU Foundation now, and so if people wanted to donate financially, they could make a donation to the NMSU Foundation and specify that it's for the Aggie Cupboard. Also, we just got this into place. Albertsons, the grocery store, they have a community partners program where you might have seen there's little tags that you can put on your key ring, and when you go shopping, if you have the cashier scan your whatever it's called, the card, then a portion of your grocery sales will go towards whatever that organization is, and it's called the Community Partners Program. And so the Aggie Cupboard just got approved for that too. So that's a really easy way people can help, because everyone, if you go grocery shopping, all you have to do is hand the cashier your keys, and you'll know that a portion of what you're spending is going to come back to the Aggie Cupboard.
How much money does it really take to run a pantry, though? I mean, is there a lot of finances just keeping the lights on or anything like that, or just keeping it coming in?
Well, the university has infrastructure in place, so none of the departments, we don't have to worry about paying a utility bill. That's already kind of part and parcel of operating on campus. In terms of what it costs to run it, I think I'm still figuring that out. Every semester, based on the number of clients and the amount of food we're going through, the cost for the food will vary. My salary is taken care of by my position, but we're going to be constantly seeking just alternate and varied sources of funding to make sure that the Aggie Cupboard can stay viable. So the short answer is, I don't know. I'm still learning.
Okay. Now, we just have a couple minutes left, but I was
Sure.
curious, how much is it to really get the knowledge out there about just getting proper nutrition while you're in college?
Mm-hmm.
Do you spend a lot of time with that while you're handing things out, or, I mean, is there a set way that you hand out meals?
Oh, sure. Well, it's, we're always looking at what we have. So what we give to people will vary based on what we have, but what we try to do is have a balance of the food that's in the bag, so always some form of protein, and then just staples, things like beans, rice, canned vegetables, fruit when we have it, pasta. We get a lot of ramen donations, and so we put that into pasta and tomato sauce, sometimes beverages, sometimes snacks, but the idea is just to kind of try and make a well-rounded amount of food to give to people. So we haven't done, we don't necessarily do nutrition counseling when people come in. It's a pretty simple process when people come in. So they come in, give their ID, we ask a few questions, and then give them their food. We do check for things like, do people have food allergies or things they can't eat? But that's about how it goes.
All right, we just have about 30 seconds left. How can people contact you to find out more information about the Aggie Cupboard?
Sure. The easiest way is always going to be my email, which is mlori@nmsu.edu. People can also call the Counseling Center, which is 646-2731, and route any questions they have through there.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest was Lori Haussamen. She is a social worker here at New Mexico State University and was integral in starting the Aggie Cupboard, a food pantry here for NMSU students. I'm Anthony Moreno. Thank you for joining us on Fronteras to Changing America.